Hello, it's great to be together once again. I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to revisit one of the most shocking episodes in the history of Paralympic sports. At the 2000 Sydney Paralympic Games, the Spanish basketball team won the gold medal. However, a scandal emerged. Out of the 12 players on the team, only 2 actually had an intellectual disability. In other words, people without disabilities competed and won a competition meant for athletes with special needs. What an outrageous story, right? In today's video, we'll explore this shameful case and understand how it was possible. Before pointing out those responsible for this fraud, it's important to understand how disability classifications work in the Paralympics. At the 2000 Sydney Paralympic Games, the world witnessed one of the biggest frauds ever recorded in sports. An episode that would deeply shake the trust in the system and highlight the weaknesses of the institutions meant to uphold fairness and equality in sporting competitions. The plot began to unfold long before the basketball games, in secret meetings and questionable decisions, when Fernando Martín Vicente, president of the Spanish Federation for Athletes with Intellectual Disabilities, devised a plan to ensure Spain's victory. What initially seemed like a minor adjustment in athlete recruitment soon turned into a much larger conspiracy. Vicente, who had led the federation for years, knew that sporting results could attract sponsorships and prestige, both for himself and for his organization. In his pursuit of success at any cost, he made a risky decision to form a men's basketball team for the Paralympics, made up mostly of players without disabilities. In Paralympic sports, classifications are extremely strict and serve to ensure fair competition among athletes. The intellectual disability category is particularly sensitive, as it involves a series of cognitive and functional tests to determine if an athlete is eligible to compete. Fernando Vicente knew that if he could bypass this system, he would have an almost unbeatable team, capable of dominating the competition. So, he began recruiting players who didn't meet the Paralympic criteria, promising them an opportunity to compete internationally in exchange for maintaining the fraud. The plan was simple but ambitious. Use falsified documents and manipulate the classification process to allow players without intellectual disabilities to be approved as eligible. With the support of his connections within the federation, Vicente assembled a team that promised to bring glory to Spain, while covering up what would become one of the biggest scandals in world sports. With the plan in motion, Fernando Martín Vicente began building the team that would carry out the fraud. He sought players from lower basketball leagues in Spain, where athletes without disabilities were used to competing in amateur and university tournaments. These players, who had long dreamed of gaining recognition, were quickly convinced by Vicente that participating in a Paralympic tournament would be a unique opportunity in their careers, even under fraudulent conditions. The selection of the team was done meticulously. Although the players were recruited from non-professional divisions, some had advanced technical skills, honed through their prior experiences in the sport. Vicente prepared them to represent the country in an international event, coaching them on how to mask their true abilities. To ensure that no one would suspect anything, the president of the federation managed to forge medical reports and certifications that falsely confirmed the athletes' intellectual disabilities. During the process, he explained to the players that their participation was a kind of help to Paralympic sports. Vicente argued that the level of competitiveness needed to be raised to attract more media attention and sponsors. He suggested that the presence of athletes without disabilities would add more dynamism to the game. For the players, this explanation was convenient enough for them to participate without raising many moral concerns. After all, the promise of traveling to Sydney and competing in a prestigious event, even illicitly, was too tempting to refuse. When they arrived at the classification tests, Vicente's scheme went even further. The players didn't have to undergo genuine intellectual performance tests. Instead, they were put through basic physical evaluations, like push-ups and exercises that had nothing to do with cognitive ability, allowing them to infiltrate the Paralympic competitions. With the forged documents in place and their intellectual disability classification secured, the team was ready to compete. Spain's men's basketball team was now disguised as a legitimate Paralympic team, even though most of its members had no disability at all. The impact of this act of corruption was imminent. With a group of athletes in full mental and physical capacities, the Spanish team quickly stood out in the qualifying rounds. The players' skill levels far exceeded those of their opponents, leading to overwhelming victories. In the early games, the superiority of the Spanish team was clear. Still, few dared to raise suspicions. After all, who could imagine that such a blatant fraud was unfolding on the Paralympic stage? With the Spanish team dominating the matches, the path to the gold medal seemed assured. The victories piled up in a staggering manner, with the team posting such lopsided scores that the players themselves began to slow down, following instructions from their coaches to avoid drawing too much attention. The ease with which they won, especially against opponents like China, began to raise whispers, but no one had enough proof to challenge the legitimacy of the team. The peak of the fraud came during the final against Russia, the only team able to offer any real resistance. Even so, the Spaniards prevailed, claiming the coveted gold medal. The team climbed the podium, celebrating what, in the eyes of the public and the media, was a historic achievement for Spain. Images of the players celebrating were broadcast, and Spain seemed to have reached a significant milestone in Paralympic sports. However, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Behind the scenes, something unexpected was unfolding. One of the players, Carlos Ribagorda, had another motive for being on the team. Ribagorda wasn't just an athlete, he was also an investigative journalist. He had infiltrated the team with the intention of exposing the scheme. His conscience, or perhaps the fear of personal repercussions, led him to write an explosive article right after the victory, revealing the fraud to the world. Ribagorda's article was straightforward. He exposed that 10 out of the 12 players had no intellectual disabilities, and that their participation had been secured through falsified documents and fraudulent classifications. The revelation was a shock to the International Paralympic Committee and to Spain itself. The story quickly gained global attention, with the media questioning how such an elaborate scheme had gone unnoticed for so long. Interestingly, Ribagorda's revelation raised doubts about his intentions. If he had known about the fraud from the start, why hadn't he exposed it before the competition? Many speculated that his decision to speak out only after the victory might have been an attempt to distance himself from the inevitable fallout. Nonetheless, his report detonated the scandal, shattering the illusion of glory for the Spanish team. From that moment on, the victory turned into shame. The medals were swiftly confiscated, and the team was disqualified from the Paralympics. For the players who truly had disabilities, the loss was even more painful, as they hadn't fully understood what was happening until it was too late. And for those who participated in the fraud, all that remained was the burden of a reputation forever tarnished. The revelation of the fraud not only shook the Spanish team but also left deep scars across the entire Paralympic movement. The scandal was a severe blow to the credibility of the competitions and exposed critical flaws in the classification and oversight systems. After Ribagorda's expose, the International Paralympic Committee launched a wide-ranging investigation, and the implications spread quickly. The fraud wasn't an isolated incident. Other sports were also affected, and new cases of forged certificates began to emerge. The immediate outcome was the exclusion of athletes with intellectual disabilities from the Paralympics. This drastic measure was deemed necessary to reassess the eligibility criteria and prevent frauds like Spain's from happening again. However, it had a devastating impact on many athletes who legitimately dreamed of competing. For those who had dedicated their lives to Paralympic sports, the exclusion meant the abrupt end of their careers and opportunities. For years, the committee worked hard to develop a more robust evaluation system capable of accurately identifying athletes eligible to compete in the intellectual disability categories. But the damage had already been done. Confidence in the competitions had been shaken, and the public, which already paid little attention to the Paralympic Games, became even more skeptical of the integrity of the events. Among the biggest victims were the two Spanish players who genuinely had intellectual disabilities. Although they had no direct involvement in the fraud, their medals were also stripped away, and they found themselves in the center of a scandal they could barely comprehend. These athletes, who should have been celebrating the pinnacle of their careers with a gold medal, were unwittingly dragged into humiliation and discredit. However, the scandal also sparked important discussions about the inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities in sports. In 2009, after years of review, the International Paralympic Committee decided to reintroduce these categories, but with much stricter criteria. The return was gradual and cautious, culminating in the official re-inclusion of athletes with intellectual disabilities at the 2012 London Paralympics. Still, the shadows of the 2000 scandal continued to haunt the competitions for a long time. As for Fernando Martín Vicente, the mastermind behind the scheme, he was legally held accountable for the fraud. After years of investigations and a lengthy trial, he was convicted of forgery and fraud. However, many felt that justice was too lenient. Vicente never served a significant prison sentence, and after a long legal process, he ended up paying only a fine. Worse yet, he continued to run his NGO, which still received public subsidies for projects aimed at people with intellectual disabilities, sparking widespread outrage. The case of Spain's basketball team at the 2000 Sydney Paralympics became a grim example of how unchecked ambition can corrupt even the noblest values of sports. It raised questions about ethics, responsibility, and the limits of competitiveness, especially in an environment where fairness and equality should be central pillars. Above all, it left a bitter lesson. For every victory won through illicit means, there's a price to be paid, whether moral, professional, or legal. Today, when we look back, the scandal serves as a reminder that integrity in sports is essential and that fraud, no matter how well planned, always comes to light. In the end, those who participated in the Spanish scheme may never have found peace with their consciences. After all, how could they sleep at night knowing they didn't just steal a medal, but also the dreams of athletes who genuinely deserved to be there? And so we conclude this shocking story, which unfortunately left a negative mark on Paralympic sports. This case shows us how ambition and lack of ethics can harm not only the integrity of competitions but also the dreams of honest athletes. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss future videos. And of course, share this video with your friends so more people can learn about this intriguing story. I sincerely appreciate your company, and I'll see you in the next video.